Chair.
Miss Ogier, could you mute your microphone, please?
Live.
Hello and welcome to the viewing and listening audience to this, the 39th meeting of the Joint Select Committee of Social Services and Public Administration. I'm the committee's chairman, Paul Richards. Thank you for joining us. This is the committee's second virtual hearing convened by this committee, and the committee's second hearing with stakeholders pursuant to its inquiry into the Ministry of Education strategies for ensuring continuity of delivery of education services amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Our first hearing was held on Friday, May 22nd, with officials from the Ministry of Education and tutor. Members of the public are invited to submit their comments via the Parliament's social media platforms, YouTube channel Parview, or via Facebook or Twitter. We'll be happy to factor those comments and questions into our conversation with our stakeholders. We just have some guidelines we'd like to outline for our virtual meeting, reminding our participants, and there are many participants in this interface, that the virtual meeting requires certain specifications. Please ensure that your microphone is muted if you are not speaking or making a contribution, to help keeping our background noises to a minimum, because we understand that you're at various locations, including your houses and your offices. So if you can help us with that. Also, adjust your camera so that your face is framed in the center of the frame so that we have a proper presentation to the viewing audience. And ensure at this time that notifications on your cell phone or any other electronic device in your vicinity are muted during the course of this interface. At this time, I'd like to introduce our members. I am the chairman of the committee, and the members of the committee in whole, Mr. Esmond Ford, Mrs. Glenda Jennings-Smith, Brigadier Retired Ansel Antoine, Mrs. Christine Nawala Hussein, Mr. Rohan Sinanan, Ms. Alison West, and Ms. Khadija Amin. With us today are members Retired General Antoine, member Christine Nawala Hussein, and member Amin. I'd like them at this time to introduce themselves, please, starting with member Nawala Hussein.
Good morning to all our participants and to all our listeners out there and viewers. Welcome to this second virtual meeting, and thank you for being here.
Member Antoine.
Good morning, everyone. General Antoine, member.
And I know we have member Amin with us. Or she's not with us yet. Okay, she'll be joining us in process. At this time, I'd like to invite members of the stakeholders to please introduce themselves, starting with the officials of the National Primary Schools Principals Association. Do remember to unmute your mic before you make your presentation. Please, we're starting with Mr. Motley. Please introduce yourself and the other stakeholders of the National Primary Schools Principals Association.
Good morning to Mr. Chairman and to all members. My name is Lance Motley, the President of the National Primary School Principals Association.
Vice President.
Good morning all. Kalikman, First Vice President of the National Primary Schools Principals Association.
Thank you so much. Let's go to the Association of Principals of Public Primary Schools, starting with the President.
Good morning all. Association of Public Secondary Schools, President Ronald Mutusa. Good morning all. Good morning to your viewing public.
Thank you so much. And the First Vice President and Tobago representative of the Principals of Public Secondary Schools.
Good morning, everyone. I am Shara Carrington James, First Vice President of APS.
Thank you. We now move to the officials of the Presbyterian Primary Schools Board of Education, starting with the General Secretary. Mrs. Geeta Maharaj.
Right. Good morning. Yeah, this is Geeta Maharaj. I'm the General Secretary of the Presbyterian Primary Schools Board of Education.
Thank you. And next we go to the advisor to the board. Mr. Ramlal.
Good morning, everyone.
And also we go now to the officials of the Presbyterian Secondary Schools Board of Education, starting with the chairman.
Good morning. My name is Joel Bajnath. I'm the Secretary of the Presbyterian Secondary School Board.
Thank you. And now to the officials of the Astra Board of Education, the General Secretary of the Education Board. Go ahead, please. Ms. Ojir.
Good morning, all. I am Afiza Ojir, Secretary of the Astra Education Board.
And Mr. Hussain, the General Secretary of the Astra Incorporated.
Good morning, all. Rahimul Hussain, General Secretary of the Anjuman Sunnatul Jamaat Association and also member of the Astra Education Board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And officials of the Catholic Education Board now, starting with the General Secretary.
Good morning. I think you mean the Chief Executive Officer. We no longer have a General Secretary.
I apologize. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I am Sharon Douglas Mangru, the Chief Executive Officer of the Catholic Education Board of Management.
Sharon Douglas Mangru.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I am Ayana Nero, the Senior Operations Manager of the Catholic Education Board of Management.
Thank you so much. And now we will welcome from Support Autism TNT, the Director and Founder.
Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Radhika Mehes, Director and Founder of Support Autism TNT.
Thank you. And finally, from the Down Syndrome Family Network. Could you repeat that, please, Ms. Ghani?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Ghani, board member of the Down Syndrome Family Network.
Thank you all very much. As you can see, it's quite a large group of stakeholders today, but we really wanted to include as many voices as possible because your experiences are so varied in so many different ways. Let me just start by advising that when we met with the Education Ministry and Tutor last week, what was discovered was that because of the unexpected, of course, onset of the pandemic and the fact that the state officials, the government officials had to enact life-saving restrictions on Trinidad Tobago in every particular sector, including restricting movements and basically bringing the country to a halt to contain the spread of the virus. Many sectors, including the education sector, were significantly affected. And it was important to us as a committee to find out what the challenges that were being faced and how we as a committee could glean this information into a cohesive report to present to the ministry and other stakeholders with a view of mitigating many of the challenges faced and also to providing the kinds of interventions that were needed to ensure that the stakeholders, in particular the young people, the ECE students and the primary and secondary school students, were provided with some sort of interventions in a situation that will never be perfect, but certainly we can move in a way that can help these students to bridge the gaps that have been elicited by the pandemic and the restrictions that the government has had to put in place. And with that said, we'd like to start with the National Primary Schools Principals Association and its president to give us an overview of what your experience has been like. And we like to keep the contributions as succinct as possible. So we start with Mr. Motley and that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The National Primary School Principals Association, we have been engaging in a number of discussions among our members in a number of areas to ensure that our students, particularly in terms of engaging our students, to ensure that our students are kept occupied. The Ministry of Education would have engaged us over the period to assist it in getting our teachers on board, et cetera, et cetera. But the challenge, and the only challenge with that is that one, a number of students were not able to access the Ministry of Education's SLMS platform, as well as other platforms that other teachers might have been using out there. So they did not have the access. Many of our students didn't have the access or don't have the access to devices on the one hand, and secondly to internet access as well. So those were the challenges that we would have encountered when we sought to engage our students out there. So that's one area. I don't know how far you want me to go, but
you can continue. What are the other areas?
Created quite a number of different scenarios. So one scenario would have been to ensure that our students are engaged. Another scenario would be, and we're moving forward now, to determine how our new school environment would be, and perhaps maybe later on we can develop that. And another scenario, of course, which seems to be one of the major topics out there, is about SEA. So we have opinions on all of these.
We're coming up to the SC and CSEC and Cape.
How far you want me to go
later. We're coming up to SC and CSEC later on, so we'll deal with that. Let me go to Mr. Mutu, the president of the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools, and what your experience has been.
Good morning to everyone. Let me say thank you very much once again. Just to say that we as principals have been very, very much engaged in the transition from face-to-face learning to online learning. Our experiences has been there's a lot of difficulty really with the online learning, a number of challenges I know which we'll cover in due course. But I also want to say that some and many experiences have been very rewarding. For the secondary schools, CAPE and CSEC exams were very much uppermost in our minds, and we have been doing all we can to facilitate the hosting of these. I want to say that we as principals have been ourselves learning of the online platforms and the various methodologies of online teaching. We have held workshops with our teachers. We have done numerous meetings with our teachers, in some instances with parents, and of course online teaching. I want to say in that respect too that APS TNT held its vacation workshop online, a historic online workshop this year with over 150 participants. I want to plug in also that as I am also the president of the Caribbean Associations of Secondary Schools, of Principals of Secondary Schools, and I have been having numerous virtual meetings with the Caribbean principals, and in fact we have ongoing and online training with Caribbean teachers and principals towards the online transition into online teaching and learning.
Thank you so much. Let's go to the Presbyterian Primary Schools Board of Education. Mrs. Geeta Maharaj, what has your experience been in the round? Mrs. Maharaj?
Moment. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we're hearing you now. Go ahead, please.
At this point, I would like to turn this, allow Mr. Ramlal to make the presentation here.
Not a problem.
That's all
Mr.
right
Ramal.
with you, sir?
That's fine, thank you. Mr. Ramal, go ahead, please.
Good morning again to members of the Joint Select Committee. The Presbyterian Primary Schools Board of Education experience has been a fairly difficult one. Like Mr. Motley indicated, we had a lot of issues concerning internet connectivity for both students and teachers, the lack of devices for students and teachers, and even many of our teachers lacked the technological skills to effectively do online teaching. What we found many of our teachers and principals use was the WhatsApp platform to communicate with their parents and students. The students with special needs and the students who were challenged had a lot of difficulty being reached because you did not have one-on-one face-to-face that they would normally get in the school setting. So that was another issue. The board was unable to help our students with technological devices or even our teachers But when we interface with our schools, bread and butter issues seem to be the more important issues. Students were not getting the food support and the food card that they had expected. So a lot of our energies of our principals and teachers was expended on trying to provide the basic for our students. One of the things that happened as well is when Tutor in their work from home policy indicated that the work of teachers during this period was voluntary. A lot of teachers then took a different approach and accountability became an issue. But they were saying if they were working voluntarily, then there was no need to really account. And that created some problems. We feel that the period covered has not been very effective. There was no systematic programs being used, so teachers were doing different things. Some were doing enrichment and remedial exercises. Some were doing curriculum. The one area that people really tried to stick to the curriculum and do work was the SCA classes. We also believe that the figure quoted by the Ministry of Education of 68 to 70,000 students being without devices might be a little low. Our figure probably looks at about 90,000. And as a result, we feel that the program has not been very effective in terms of reaching our students during this period. And we foresee that when school reopens in September, our teachers and principals will have to do a lot of diagnostic work to see exactly where our students are.
Thank you very much. Let's go to thank you very much, Mr. Ramlal. Let's go to Mr. Bajnath of the Presbyterian Secondary Schools Board of Education for your overview of what your experience has been so far.
Most of the schools under our purview have done well so far. They have communicated with their students very well. However, some of the problems they have encountered is feedback from the students, and some of the students, they are not all present during the online classes. They utilize most of the online system already, so it's not new to our schools in doing work with the students. But as I said, some of it is attendance and feedback from the students. Not all the students are complying with assignments. As such, those are some of the concerns we have. Also, with regards to the reopening back of the schools, especially now where we have the SBAs being done and the exams will be held shortly, there are some concerns with some HSC issues that, what needs to be addressed, especially with the sanitization. But they already have systems in place. We already have systems in place, and that is taking place. With regards to each student getting attention, they are constantly being monitored by the VPs and the deans who are being supervised by the principals and doing their regular checks to ensure that proper curriculum activities have been covered. Most of the curriculum have been covered before 90%, 95% have been covered before the pandemic hit. So it wasn't a big major problem for us completing anything. There were minor instances where a few students were unable to access electronic devices for completing SBA, and the schools stepped in together with consultation with the family, and laptops were provided, or access to laptops were made so that these children could complete their SBA. Financially preparing due to this epidemic have taken a little toll on the resources in the school. And that seems to be a minor problem that we would need some assistance in.
Thank you so much. Let's go to the Astra Board of Education and the General Secretary of the Education Board, Ms. Ojir, please. Ms. Ojir. Go ahead, please.
Some of the challenges our teachers faced were that some of the students were not ready for online teaching and learning, including the teachers who are not very savvy in the technology. Some of them did not have computers, and there was no standardized scheme of work and guidelines. So teachers focused on revisions and some bit of new teaching. Also, with regard to the psychological, teachers were more interfacing with students as the need be and as contacted. The organization in itself focused more on survival of all our most of our stakeholders. So there was no much injection into our schools. The readiness for reopening of schools, there are a lot of work. We heard that the minister said that the Ministry of Health would be assisting in sanitizing schools for the reopening. Unfortunately, we have not seen any help coming to our schools. So the principals are doing the best that they can to accommodate the upcoming exams. Also, there would be financial implications to satisfy all the needs of the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health as we go forward with regard to social distancing and all the hygiene. So we are awaiting communication from the minister as to how the board schools will be assisted. Important is safety. As we see in most of the institutions, we have the thermal testing. How would this be done? Is it that people will just walk in? Who will be doing this? So safety in our schools would be of paramount importance. We are suggesting that all schools, should have safety officers who would be able to assist in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let's go to the CEO of the Catholic Education Board to give us a sense of how the schools under your purview have been coping during the pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I start, I want to congratulate the Parliament, the committee, on bringing us all stakeholders together, because I think it is really very important that we speak to each other and that we hear from each other. Soon after the schools were closed, the Archbishop, Jason Gordon, called together our principals and teachers through a series of virtual meetings. We spoke with teachers and principals and asked them what they needed. His Grace shared with them his concerns about continuing education and what the research says about children who are left unattended for long periods of time, and the big concern with regression. So, having asked teachers what they needed, we then started to put in place whatever mechanisms we could to fulfill the needs of teachers and principals. At the secondary level, he also met with the IT technicians from the secondary schools. We then proceeded to provide some training for our principals and our teachers. And as most of the other speakers have said, we continue to engage our students using the internet, and our teachers were using a variety of platforms. We also collaborated with the Ministry of Education to provide lessons for television. At the time, the ministry was focusing on SEA classes, and our concern was the students from infants to standard 4. So we have actually started production, and we've been airing those programs on TTT as the open classroom. We also started to produce print material in the Catholic News for those students who would not be able to access the internet or the television. We noticed that a number of students did not have either internet connectivity or devices. And this is common to what most countries in Latin America, the Caribbean, and even some European countries have been reported. Same issues, my colleagues here have reported the same issues. We attempted to provide devices. The Archbishop put out a call for people to donate used devices. And so far, we have distributed some 58 devices to teachers and a large number to students as well. We've also been able to assist some students in getting data. because while we found that most people have cell phones and many teachers were using WhatsApp as a means of communicating with parents and teachers, yes, they would have they have their cell phones, but often they could not afford sufficient data to be able to spend a long time on the phone as was needed for the lessons. As other people have reported, teachers' communication with the students, in most cases, it was WhatsApp, and that was the preferred means. But they've been using a variety of other platforms. Many of our students, as you may know, many of our schools are in rural areas. Some of them are in areas that are severely challenged. So many of our students needed help, their families needed help, bread and butter sort of help. And our schools rose to the challenge where students did not receive cards to gain assistance, food cards. We were able to raise funds or get donations in other ways to provide for those families. We've had a number of teachers as well as students who needed psychosocial support, because some teachers have been severely impacted as well psychologically. Teachers, we've been able to provide that support either through teachers referring their students to the Ministry of Education, or through support provided at a parish level, or through the Archdiocese hotlines. The same thing has happened with our teachers. The teachers primarily tend to go to the Archdiocese hotline or to the support that we provide by the parishes. We have offered to collaborate with the Ministry of Education in any way that we can to continue reaching all of our students. A big concern as we look to opening in September is
I'm going to actually put a pause there, because we're going to get to some of those concerns in a short while. Thank you very much, Ms. Mango, who is the CEO of the Catholic Education Board. We'd also like to welcome Member Ford, who is the Deputy Chair of the committee. Member Ford, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to be late, but I'm here and I'll enter in when I need to.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Member Ford. And we'd like to go, although they have certainly a different experience and may have different challenges, we've also invited two principals in two special needs organizations in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's start with Lisa Ghani in terms of the Down Syndrome Family Network and what the experience of your members has been through this pandemic. Ms. Ghani.
Experience has really shown up very much the inequalities in our society regarding children with disabilities, and in particular children with intellectual disabilities. These children, on the main part, many of them were not able, even before the pandemic, to access education in the inclusive term of education. And so therefore they did not enjoy quality learning on the same level or equal basis as the typical children. And during the pandemic, many of the issues that we have heard so far this morning have also relate to children with intellectual disabilities. However, there is the additional challenge of face-to-face learning, which is very instrumental in many of the cases, and the need for individual education plans, which many of our children, as I said, do not have access to as in the normal state of affairs. So the issues of lack of internet access apply in addition to the need for physical therapy, speech therapy, and other types of occupational therapy. Nutrition also would be another aspect where food cards and so on and social service grants were not immediately accessible or done in an efficient manner. Some families are still waiting for the grants that were promised, student support services, and also some of the other services. They have reached out to some parents. In our network, we do have a WhatsApp family group for Trinidad that has 101 families on it. And in Tobago, we have 25. And we have been keeping in touch with them through these WhatsApp groups and asking them to provide feedback. Many were when I say many, I can relate to about 5 of them who were contacted early in March and who never had any other follow-up regarding how they were doing and did they need anything. But that was an initial call that never had an outcome. In addition, families may have only one laptop, and therefore the typical child will get privileged over the child with the intellectual disability in the use of the laptop while, during class time as well. Again, parent support, someone mentioned the psychosocial impact. And in this case, in many cases, the parents require psychosocial support as well because they're dealing with, the whole family and not only the child with the disability. And of course, there's a big disparity between the support given by private schools, where we do have some children enrolled in private schools, in typical schools, this type of support that they get versus the type of support that the children who are attending public schools are getting as well, regarding lesson plans, teacher, face-to-face teacher time, even with an assistant teacher, and the amount of actual class interaction that they have. So I think, that's basically where we're at. Some of them are using different applications, Seesaw, Moodle, Google Classroom, and YouTube channels. And the network has also posted a variety of different learning tools which we can access through our international partners. We have put that on our Facebook, our website, and we share it with the parents on our WhatsApp chat as well so that they can create their own lesson plans for their kids, because we also urge them, not to leave this time unattended, but to get their children into a routine and set up a home classroom where they can have some sort of structure in their day.
Thank you very much, Ms. Candy. And last but by no means least, the founder and director of Autism Trinidad Tobago, whom I know has quite a large membership, Dr. Radhika Mahes. Dr. Mahes, what has been the experience of your membership?
So good morning to everyone, to all members. I want to start off by telling you that we did a short survey of 140 children who are registered with Support Autism TNT. And out of that 140 children, only 14 are attending a government school. 53 are attending private school for special needs children, and the other 72 children are currently not attending a school. And this is before the whole COVID situation happened. Out of the 14 children who are attending a government school, we did some feedback. We got some feedback from the parents. And most of them, 10 of them have literally stopped doing work since the schools have closed. And this is because the higher functioning ones were able to manage the online learning platform, but the others who are mostly visual learners, they did not find that the online learning platform was very stimulating to them, because most of the activities on the online learning platform or that was sent by their teachers were worksheets and so on, and they were not able to sit and do those. Now, we also have many parents who are not in because of educational background and so on, are not in a position to sit and do the work with their children. They would normally depend on the teachers or the teachers' aides. So because the teachers and the teachers' aide don't have that interactive sessions with the students right now, they have literally stopped learning. 3 of the students did not have access to devices or connectivity, but this was resolved because they reached out to various different organizations who helped them. We also had students who had problems, as Ms. Ghani said, with nutrition. And we stepped in as an NGO and we were distributing food supplies to them. We also recently received a grant that will help us to help those children with their medical supplies and supplements and so on. So we have been trying to reach out to them, but in terms of the learning environment, they're at a big disadvantage. And as Ms. Ghani said, this whole COVID situation have shown up the inequalities in special needs education. Because while the higher functioning children with autism can still try to get some work done, the lower functioning one have no kind of assistance at present. And for those who are in private schools, not because they were in private schools meant that they continue getting an education. Only 22 of those of the 53 who are attending a private school continued. For the others, 50% could not afford to continue paying the school fees because parents were unemployed. So the situation for children with autism is not a very nice one right now. And we are really hoping that the ministry can step in at some point and something more can be done for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahis. I'm going to open the floor now to Member Hussein and then Member Antoine, because at the end they're chomping at the bit with questions for all of you stakeholders. Member Hussein, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. There's so many questions, but I'm going to start with the food support. In the many submissions, principals indicated and reported that many of the students in need did not receive the food card support. And there were in many cases a lot of requests that were in fact convoluted. And I would like to find out from perhaps the Presbyterian board or the Catholic board, perhaps if you can indicate what is the estimated or actual number of eligible students within your school who did not receive food support, and really what transpired that led to this situation here.
If we can start with the Presbyterian board on that, please. Secondary schools and primary schools, and then the Catholic board.
The Presbyterian board experienced approximately only 20% of our students received assistance. Principals were bombarded by parents indicating they had not received the food card and that they needed assistance. So the board, through our principals and various stakeholders, we provided support. And recently our churches, when we received the grant from government for religious bodies, we were also able to provide some support to our students. But many, many students and parents complained that they did not get the food card.
When you said 20%, is it 20% of the students originally registered to receive food intervention at the schools, or is it 20% overall students?
20% of the students registered to receive food support at the schools. There was some disparity in that in some districts, the principals were asked to cut the list and supply names of the most needy students. Whereas in some districts, educational districts, they supplied the entire list. The list was then sent from the Ministry of Education to the Ministry of Social Development and then to the members of parliament. So some members of parliament were claiming they had a list of almost 2,000 children and they got 500 food cards to distribute. So we have schools that had about 100 children on the list and maybe 5 or 10 students got food cards. And then later on, they got some food hampers. But it was not what was expected and created quite a bit of problems for our principals who were constantly bombarded by parents asking why we didn't receive the food card. I think the problem came about very early when the Minister of Social Development made the announcement. There was the impression that all parents who were not already receiving a food card but were on the school feeding list were going to get a food card. And later on, the government policy changed to the more needy students. So as a result, there was a gap there and it did create a problem.
Let's go to the Catholic board on that and then Astra, please.
Mr. Chairman, our experience is similar. And what contributed to a bit of the confusion was that the instructions that came to principals were conflicting, so that in some cases, principals were asked to supply the entire list of students who were accessing school nutrition. And in others, they were asked to choose. One principal has...
On what basis are the principals being asked to choose? How does one determine who is more needy? Is there a matrix supplied?
I do not think there was a matrix supplied. And as one principal described the situation, he said they were given 24 hours. He had a list of 211 students. And in 24 hours, he had to go through that list and determine who was more deserving. The list was not totally up to date because, as he said, some family circumstances would have changed. And particularly given the COVID situation, some circumstances would have changed drastically. Again, there was miscommunication between the various organizations because in some cases people were given the food cards based on their residence and in other cases based on the area in which the school was located. So there was a great deal of confusion. Like my Presbyterian colleague, I think it would be less than 20% of the people who were registered who actually received food cards. We were able to make up for that by various means in the parishes, noting, of course, that not all the students who attend our schools are Catholic. In fact, less than half the students who attend Catholic schools are Catholic. But those who could have accessed the parishes did. Those who could access the hotline did. But the schools, to a large extent, were able to gather resources to be able to distribute to those students.
Before I go to Astra, how much did the subvention to religious organizations help in that gap, that shortfall?
I will not be able to answer that because the Catholic Education Board of Management is not part of the organization for handling that
understood.
subvention.
All right. Let's go to Astra, and then we can go to the National Primary Schools Principals and the National Public Schools Secondary Principals to get a sense from their perspective how that food intervention situation was handled. So we can go to Astra first, please.
Rahimul Hussein here. We have had similar experience with the food cards and the needy students in our schools. But by and large, even before the government announced the food cards and the subvention to the religious denominational boards, organizations for the food hampers, we had private individuals associated with Astra coming forward and preparing hampers for distribution to the schools. In addition to that, we have had one individual donating almost 500 hampers to our schools. We have had another individual in the Charleville area to distributing to the 7 primary schools that is under the stewardship of Astra, and they gave hampers to the schools also. In addition, the subvention that the government gave to each religious board denomination, that went a long way also in alleviating the shortfall. Those who did not get, we were ensured that they would have gotten it. But this challenge was similar. I don't think, I'm pretty sure that there may have been 1 or 2 who we were unable to reach. And we're hoping with the second tranche that the government has intended to give out, that we would be able to reach them. Thank you.
Thank you. And just before we go to the principals associations, we'd like to put on the record, we did also extend an invitation to the Senate and Dama Mahasaba to send representatives. They acknowledged receipt of the invitation, but did not choose to send a representative. So if we go to the National Primary Schools Association and also the Association of Principals for Public Secondary Schools, in terms of what your experiences have been with Member Hussein's question about the food intervention and nutrition aspect with the pandemic. So we can go to the Primary Schools Association first, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, the experiences have been similar. Actually, we think that there was a lot of confusion with respect to the communique coming out from the Ministry of Education. We were told the Ministry of Education was handling was assisting the Ministry of Community Development, and I suppose there might have been some mixed communication between both ministries, but the information coming to principals was very confusing at one time. At one time, they had asked us to provide a list of all of the students who were on the school feeding list. And we got the impression, I can't recall if it was said or if it was insinuated, that the students who were on the school feeding list would be given, their parents would be given a food card. And at other times, some principals, not all by the way, some principals or some districts were told that only a selected few children would be selected for food cards, and principals were required to determine who those children would be. Again, so the information, it wasn't across the board, it wasn't across Trinidad and Tobago, it was very mixed and it was very confusing. And it led to a lot of bungling in terms of gathering the data and the kinds of data that the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Social Development would have wanted. That may have contributed towards the food card distribution not reaching the correct people. But even so, the feedback that we have been getting, that we got from our principals, is that in some schools, very few children got food cards. Very few, or parents, I should say, got few cards. In some cases, about 5, and in some cases, maybe would have been more. We do not know what the criteria that would have been used to select these children, but we were asked to provide a list, and that is what we did. We recognize that some private sector, the private sector would have intervened in terms of providing food support to some schools, etc. And we want to recognize that. But the food card issue was, it bungled. We have to admit that. It bungled.
Let's go to the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools and what your experience has been with the food intervention initiative. I don't know if Mr. Mutu or Mrs. Carrington James would like to take it on.
Okay, maybe I can. The experience at the secondary school level is really similar to what that of the primary schools Mr. Motley would have described previously. The experience is not singular, and it's echoed and reverberates across the platform of what would have just been said. At the secondary school level, however, we were simply asked to supply a list of children who were indeed engaged in the program, and that is what we so did. And beyond that, we really did not have any further interaction in the process. Some principals did report that members of parliament would have contacted them directly, soliciting further clarification on lists, but they were in the minority. Essentially, our experience was similar to the others. What this provided for us, though, was an opportunity for what we see as a new normal, a new model of how our new Caribbean school should look, of intersectorial and inter-corporate interaction. So we too jumped in there. We had lots of stakeholders on board, and therefore we reached out to those who had the need, where we could have identified the need, and we attempt to fill it in a humane and humanistic kind of response.
Member Antoine?
Yes, first of all, let me thank the principals for their cooperation during this exercise. I am fortunate in that I am a citizen MP, and I only have 8 schools inclusive of 1 secondary school in my constituency. So it was easy for me to interact with the principals in terms of the school feeding the program. Initially, we only got 100 food cards, so I was able to interact with the principal and say, look, we can only give X amount to the various schools, as the case may be. So there was a lot of, I agree, there was a lot of confusion in terms of how we were to administer these food cards, and I want to really thank the principals and the boards and them for the cooperation in getting it. At least we focused on the most needy, and the principals really did send to us who were the most needy in their schools, so that we were able to get food cards out there.
Member Hussein, what was your experience like as an MP in terms of the food cards? Member Antoine indicated he got 100 food cards for 8 schools.
Yes.
That's astounding to me.
And some MPs have 27 schools, and they got the same amount of food cards.
Member Hussein, what was your experience?
Initially, MPs would have gotten 50 and then 47, and then we would have gotten a balance which would have been total to 500. But in my case, I have 21 primary schools, 3 secondary schools. That does not take into consideration that a number of students would go to schools that are outside of my constituency. For instance, they might go to Bishop, so they may go to White Coast Secondary, Northeastern. So it meant, therefore, that even though I had students, and students were in excess of 2,000, and that is after you have removed families, because you had to go through the list and ensure that families didn't get 2 or 3 cards because of children going to various schools. So we did a very thorough removal of
So the intervention was 1 card per family.
Yes.
That was the intention.
And even after we gave out the 500, we still had over 2,000 children still to collect food cards. And even when we got hampers, we couldn't do anything. It was insufficient. And so when I heard the CEO from the Catholic board indicated that they were able to get assistance and so forth. The food card you get for 3 months, and there's a top up, but to a household. Whereas when a hamper comes, is it that same family that you're giving that hamper to? Is it that same family getting it, or is it that another family in fact gets it? And so therefore we have to look at it and see that a lot of children have not benefited, and there is inequity in the whole system, because here it is not only the children who receive box lunches in need. There are also families who do not access the box lunches who are in need as well. And therefore, it is because the box lunches are limited. You don't get 2,000 boxes. A school doesn't get 500 boxes of lunch or 100, and they get for each class. And therefore, a number of persons would have fallen through the cracks as a result of it. And when I look at all the submissions that the various boards and the psychological board sent, hunger, food support is a critical aspect of ensuring that when a person is satisfied in terms of having their hunger met, their needs met physically, you're able to produce more, you're able to study. This has not been the case, and therefore I think that the education system has fallen, not just because of the online lack of devices and various aspects, but also because of the fact that people couldn't have fed themselves. This is very serious.
All right, so we certainly have a clearer indication.
When you get a chance, could you bring me, please?
Absolutely, Mr. Ford. Could you turn on your camera, please? Is that possible?
You want to see me?
Absolutely.
Okay, am I good enough there?
Yes, just center yourself in the frame first. Go ahead, please, Mr. Deputy Chair. Because
Okay,
you're also an MP.
Yes. Good morning. I wear 2 hats, Deputy Speaker and also the member for Tulapuna. Again, morning. Sorry to be late to your meeting, Mr. Chairman, but
not a problem.
That's all part of it. All right. I think we need to be clear, all right, with regards to the discussion that we are having. All right. We were told that the food cards were for the registered children of the school feeding program. Right? I think there is a clear difference between who are registered and who may eat the box lunch, that when extra lunches are provided. Right? It's 2 things. They are registered children for the program, and then there are children that eat box lunch who may not be registered.
Just to intervene, what we established earlier on is how many of the students who even are registered received the lunches, and it seemed that even the students who were registered for the lunches at various schools at the primary and secondary level would have not been able to give the number of.
And I think the Minister of Social Development made that clear in that 500 food cards would be provided for children who are registered in the school feeding program, and the principals were to assist in identifying the most neediest of cases. I understand the principles that somewhere the communication may have been skewed along the lines, because it was also mentioned that the MPs are to give individuals that the children who would receive would be the children who attend school in your area, versus whether you would have resided in your area. And I think the member from the Catholic board made that clear. Who were we to give? The residents within my constituency, or the children who attended schools in my constituency. And I think that also started off a slight hiccup in it. As my MP, I notified the Minister of Committee of Social Development, and I proceeded along the lines of issuing these cards to children who were resident in my area. Hence the reason. For instance, if I have 2 children attending schools in 2 different constituencies, I could then go to the 2 MPs in the 2 different constituencies and receive 2 food cards for 1 household. But if you're doing it based on residence, my 2 children would go to the MP where I live, and I would receive 1 food card for that particular child.
What can I intervene?
It actually happened.
I take what you're saying as your word, but what I'm saying from you just explaining that to me is extremely confusing. And one can imagine in an emergency situation where, and I know the government is trying its best because it is an exigent circumstance. This is a pandemic. These are emergency measures that any government would have had to put in place. But your explanation there is also very confusing. And I know you may understand it because you are internal to the situation. But those who are external to the government situation may be thoroughly confused by that. And I think that is what all the stakeholders here have been distilling to us. So whether or not X was the intention, Y was the intention, the communication was somewhere along the line flawed or mistaken. And in addition to which, added to that, what would have exacerbated the situation would have been obviously very limited resources and a huge need across the board in Trinidad and Tobago. So now that we've established that, and hopefully we can learn from that, let's move to, because we have very limited time here, let's move to the issue of the, because I don't want to run out of time and not be able to deal with some of the other pressing issues in terms of the devices and what would have occurred. And I don't want to lament what went. I want to know what situation occurs now and what is needed for us moving forward, because we still have June to get through. There's the July, August normal vacation period where I'm sure some stakeholders will be looking to make up if they can, and trying to move to a September reopening in a safe manner for the nation's schools. So if I could start with the principals again, and then we go through the various stakeholders in terms of what occurs now with devices. Has that situation improved? Has the internet connectivity situation improved? Because students still, at the end of the day, no matter what miscommunications we as the stakeholders make, we have to ensure that the education is provided for the students, because they are the ones who should be our primary focus at this time. So I'd like to start with the representative of the National Primary Schools Association in terms of the infrastructure, and also if you could deal with, in terms of infrastructure, devices, if the devices situation has improved and the connectivity situation is improving, and what you'd like to see happening in terms of solid recommendations. So let's start with the Primary Schools Principals Association first on that.
Yes, thank you very much once again. Well, so let's talk about the devices for students, devices for teachers, and then we can talk about recommendations going forward. As of today, I saw some emails going around informing principals to inform their teachers to collect laptops. So the ministry would have asked for teachers to ask us to identify teachers who may need devices to reach our students. So that had happened. That was a couple of weeks ago, perhaps maybe about a month ago, but I understand now that these laptops are being distributed. By the way, I'm not too sure how many these laptops are, but I'm told is not very many, because these laptops.
My understanding is that there are 12,000 laptops that have been acquired by the ministry in the first instance, and they're seeking to acquire more.
Right. So that's one. So let's talk about the devices for the students. The Ministry of Education would have also gone on a fact-finding mission about 2 months ago, or about a month ago, asking us to assist it in identifying students who did not have access to a device or did not have access to internet, or both. We would have provided that information to the ministry. We have not yet seen any moves towards filling those gaps. So I cannot say where we are where that is concerned. Perhaps maybe the Ministry of Education will be better able to advise us. Now, going forward, because we would have recognized that quite a number of our students would not have been able to access internet devices and also the internet, And because we know that if government / the Ministry of Education were to engage in such, it would have been a huge cost. So we meaning the National Primary School Principals Association, we sought to do some brainstorming to find out how we can engage many of our students. Because again, somebody talked about equity. And we needed to ensure that the majority of our students, not as what is happening now, because not many of our students are being engaged online despite the various platforms besides WhatsApp, etc. So we came up with a proposal. We put it forward to the Ministry of Education. This proposal involved the use of television. We've heard the Catholic Board talk about television, but we went a little bit further. We did not ask, in our proposal, we are not considering TTT, because TTT, you have to share TTT with so many other kinds of programming. So we talked about using Channel 4 or using Channel 9 and 14. Well, I know these channels are no longer on the air, but the government would have the equipment. These equipment would still be available to the government. So we thought that perhaps maybe the government could assign to the Ministry of Education either Channel 4 or Channel 9 and 14. We know that television is much widely reached than internet in Trinidad and Tobago. It's cheaper. Free-to-air transmission is cheaper. The government wouldn't have to go and buy a television for every house, because many houses do have televisions in them. What may have had to happen is that they may have to tweak the towers to ensure that reception is better, etc., etc. So we put forward a huge and very nice proposal to the ministry. We said that not just the SCA students will be accommodated, but actually infants to Standard 5 would be accommodated. We put forward a timetable, how we can engage our students in a whole day class, or engage all of the students from about 9 in the morning to about 3 in the afternoon period, Monday to Friday, in various subject areas. We submitted a proposal about a month and a half ago. We have not seen anything where that is concerned. Now, going forward, we know that one school restarts, one school resumes, that we must continue, we have to continue using a blended approach to education, be it online, be it television, etc. So we also said that going forward, that the television can continue to play a significant role in continuing education among our students.
So you're suggesting a multimedia approach. The representative of the principals of public secondary schools, what's your suggestion where that is concerned in terms of your assessment of the devices and infrastructure available now in this paradigm moving forward?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just to say, no significant increase in the devices or even the internet availability to students or teachers have taken place at the secondary school levels. I know that the Catholic Board, the Presbyterian boards, and one or two other groups have made attempts to ensure that their students' needs are met. Successfully, so I must say, but the vast majority of students in the government schools and the teachers in the government schools, their situation have not improved markedly. In fact, it probably have decreased, because most households, as people are saying, would have like one laptop at home, one device generally, and you may have more than one children in your home, as is my case indeed. And as a result, when we have online classes, these children sometimes have to choose who will have the device in order to access the classes. And some of our experiences also have been that our students and teachers are on fixed, limited hours of internet access. That's the plan they pay for, so that they are not always able to access the online tuition that is afforded.
So generally, the device situation and connectivity have not improved.
have not improved at all.
All right, let's move quickly to the Presbyterian situation. Have you seen an improvement in that? Or we want to get to the other topics before we end?
Mr. Chairman, we had a meeting with Minister Francis and Minister Garcia on the 24th of April and various ministry officials. They met with all the denominational boards.
Mr. Mutu, could you mute your mic, please? Go ahead, please, Mr. Ramla.
Yeah, so we had a meeting on the 24th of April with both ministers and the ministry officials. And the issues that Mr. Motley and Mr. Mutu raised came up, the issue of internet connectivity, devices for students and teachers. And a number of promises were made to improve internet connectivity. As far as we are aware, nothing has been done in that area. The situation remains the same. As Mr. Motley said, I'm aware that from this morning, teachers have been called to collect laptops. How effective that is going to be, seeing that schools are due to be closed on the 3rd of July officially, it might be a problem in terms of effectiveness. Going forward, it seems to me that we have to think out of the box. And as Mr. Motley said, the common denominator in our household might be television set. So the use of the television set to reach our students might be an appropriate measure, because getting devices to all our students who are in need is going to be extremely costly and difficult. And even if we get the devices to them, the internet connectivity might not be there. Also, we believe that even when school reopens in September, provision has to be made for online teaching learning going forward. And it might be a costly exercise, but as Mr. Mutu said, a teacher might have a laptop at their home, but it has to be shared among other occupants of the house. So consideration should be given to providing teachers with at least one laptop so that they can execute their duties whenever they have to do online learning teaching.
We're going to put a pause here. I'm going back to Member Hussein, because I know there is the issue of infrastructure in terms of going back out in September, and also for situations regarding CAPE and CSEC coming up, and later on SCS. Member Hussein, in terms of that infrastructure, I know you had a couple of questions.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. One of the things I wanted to kind of bring together and to bring other questions, it is the devices, we need the devices and so forth for both teachers and students, which brings the question of the online teaching on a voluntary basis.
I'm going to come to that later on, Member Hussein, in a different segment, but I really want you to focus on the CSEC and CAPE preparedness.
Yes.
Yeah, and also SCA later on.
Not only that too, but also you have the Caribbean vocational qualification. How that is being dealt with, how are the SBAs being dealt with? The timing of these exams, is it in accordance with what these schools are asking for? And is there any sort of an agreement with the Ministry of Education in going forward? Are the students prepared?
Let's start with the Catholic board on that, please.
So we're looking at the CSEC and CAPE exams. There has not been any consultation between the Ministry of Education and the Catholic board on this matter. However, our views are mixed. Our principals, remember, the Catholic board represents only 5 public secondary schools and 1 private secondary. There are other Catholic boards that own the other Catholic secondary schools. Our principals are telling us that generally their school-based assessments were almost completed when school closed. The IAs for CAPE, in some cases there are issues, but there are specific subject areas where there are bigger issues, and in these subject areas, students were required to come together in order to complete them. Senator Nualo is asking about the CVQ, which is something that I am deeply interested in, having worked on it previously when I was in the ministry. And the CVQ requires students to perform, and they've got to perform while they are being observed. And
It's a practical assessment.
Yes, they are. So there are those issues. We have been asking the ministry, we not only the Catholic Board, but the Association of Denominational Boards, have been asking the ministry to bring together all of the stakeholders in one place so that we can discuss all of these issues and the various perspectives can be aired. And I think we can come up with solutions a lot faster than what currently is done, and that is meeting individual stakeholders at a time. And I think we can solve problems. All of the personnel here this morning have indicated willingness to work towards solving problems. I think bringing us together will help that a lot.
In terms of the schools' preparedness, particularly, I'm dealing specifically with CAPE and CSEC here, and I guess the CVQs. I saw the Ministry of Education or the Minister of Education doing some visits to particular schools. I know he went to QRC and a couple other schools. What are your impressions of the guidelines given and material for preparedness in terms of PPEs, personal protection devices, possible thermal units, the transportation of students in a safe manner to schools, etc.? Have there been discussions where those are consensus? I have you from the Catholic Board. Can you respond to that? And I'll go to the other stakeholders, please.
So, Mr. Chairman, I cannot say I have any impressions because I've seen no guidelines. We are awaiting these guidelines very anxiously. Our principals, of course, being professionals, have a sense of what has to be done, and they have started making some preparation. But I think there's a lot that we need to discuss and a lot we need to agree to in terms of the safety of the students, and remember the safety of the teachers as well. Precisely. And the safety of other staff.
So you've had no guidelines yet, and no equipment, etc.
Not yet.
Let's go to Astra Board and that. Ms. Oja, can you give us a sense of what your experience has been in terms of preparedness, PPEs for CAPE, CSEC, and CVQs, if you have those under your remit? Or Mr. Hussein? Ms. Oja, please put on your microphone. Your microphone is off. It's muted. You have to mute it on the device, please. Ms. Oja, you're right. Thank you. Go ahead now, please.
With regard to the guidelines, we have not received clear guidelines from the Ministry of Education, but our principals are using their initiative in trying to put things in place in preparation for students to come out to school for these exams.
Let's go to the Mr. Bajnas. From the secondary schools, Presbyterian Secondary Schools Board. Mr. Bajnas, go ahead, please. Have you received any guidelines or actual equipment?
No, we have not received any guidelines. However, similarly, principals have been taking an initiative. What we would like to see is each government school has an HSC officer assigned to them. And the standardization of the procedures and things like that should be shared so that all schools will follow the same best practice to ensure safety of the students. Because we haven't received any guidelines, the secondary school principals didn't receive any, but they're using their initiative to do as much as they could. But we should all share our learning so that we'll all do the best practice for the benefits and the safety of students and staff at the school.
Well, it's quite interesting to hear that, and it's commendable that principals are using their initiative and the individual guidelines, but my guidelines and operations will be different to yours. And I would imagine that there's a standardized approach because of the gravity of the situation that is at hand. And, well, I guess this is a fact-finding mission that we're on here. Member Antoine, you are up next. Member Antoine, right, thank you. Go ahead, please.
No, yeah, I was holding my question to deal more or less with the CEA. So.
Okay, no problem. All right. All right, so there, I can gather that there has not been any has anyone received guidelines? I better ask a broad question as to safety protocols moving forward. If anyone received guidelines, show by a show of hands. I guess not. So I guess that So you've received guidelines, Mr. Mutu?
Yes, sir. Let me say that the CMO has worked with the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Education has given some limited guidelines to principals by way of a memo. The Chief Education Officer actually also issued a memo last week indicating some very brief guidelines, but we did get guidelines.
Could you share, if you could remember, what those guidelines would look like? Is it normal PPE, social distancing, washing hands, hygiene?
That's right. It's broad guidelines like those. The school principals, however, has been asked to submit now a list of their requirements to enact those guidelines. So,
do those guidelines those brief guidelines that you've received, do they include how you are to operationalize social distancing in a classroom setting, vis-a-vis desks, chairs, students coming into classes, leaving classrooms, gathering in areas that they would normally gather under normal conditions that may be now harmful to their health, etc., inclusive of teachers? Have you received any guidelines along those lines?
Probably not full coverage of what you're asking, but we are told, for instance, to place students 6 feet apart. We are told, for instance, in our various discussions, to make passageway corridors one-ways to ensure that the water troughs, for instance, the students are not too closely lined up and so on. So we have those kind of guidelines. The ministry has indicated they will send signage to the schools. They have indicated also that the principals then are the chief operation officer in the schools. So they have asked us for things like how many additional sinks we'll need, hand sanitizing equipment, etc., etc. And as the PS would have indicated in the first of these sessions, there is now an online platform where we put that information so they have immediate access to that information. I know that the ministry has already started dispersing some cleaning supplies to various schools. They have started, I think, if not yesterday, the day before, and they are doing it on a district level. So my district, Victoria, is scheduled to receive those initial supplies, cleaning supplies, on the 12th of June. So the ministry is working. Are they working fast enough is another question, because we in the schools are expecting and have scheduled some students to return from next week to complete the SPAs and so on. Some schools, I must say, have completed SPAs, but others, especially the Form 6, the CAPE students, are required to return from next week, even though it may be on a small scale basis.
No, I know they're not particularly your remit now, but Ms. Ghani, you wanted a comment? Unmute your microphone, please. Thank you. Your microphone is muted again.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I just wanted to join the conversation because I think that, we need in this conversation to also consider the children with disabilities in a special category. When I say that, communication with regards to all these matters, opening protocols, how are we going to communicate to them? There may be various methods in which we need to communicate, because we're not just talking about children here with Down syndrome who have intellectual disabilities, but we have children who may be sight impaired, hearing impaired, wheelchair bound, and they would also need to have specific consideration for them where they are actually included in a school. Because as I started my last comment, COVID has highlighted the inequalities of our existing school system, and where many are still not even included in a school. We can't even get to the point of talking about CAPE and SEA and all these various examinations because we just don't even include them. So, in the discussion, we really need to, for those who are fortunate enough to attend a school, we really need to have some sort of program that targets these children in particular, and how we are going to be dealing with communicating with them and their parents.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it entered my mind, and I'll ask you the question first and then go to Dr. Mahes. Has there been any guideline or communication formatted for children with special needs in terms of basic interactions during COVID-19? Because children with special needs in the 13 categories will not be able to access the usual radio, television, print in many instances to understand how they should keep themselves safe or how their families can keep them safe. And I'll start with Ms. Ghani on that and go with Dr. Mahis next.
I am not aware of any programs locally that have dealt with that specifically. We have been using international programs, things that have been shared by the National Down Syndrome Society and the National Down Syndrome Congress and Inclusion International. I have been accessing that information and sharing it with our families on the platforms that I use. The other area too that I just wanted to mention with regards to the protocols for opening is that children with Down syndrome may have comorbidities as well. Now, many don't, but some do. And these also have to be taken into consideration when looking at the opening protocols as well and what exposure the children will have. So again, this just means that we need to have a lot more individual assessments being done because it's not a one size fits all when it comes to children with disabilities.
Dr. Mahis.
So it's the same thing with the children with autism. What we have noticed, generally speaking across the board, is that individual NGOs have been putting out information. You know, individual NGOs have been communicating with their children, with their membership. But nothing has come from any government ministry addressing children with special needs specifically. And I think what we need to have, or what can be suggested, is that the Ministry of Education start exploring different ways of communicating with the public, taking into consideration those with special needs. You know, whether it's in the form of more visual sense of washing your hands or whatever it is, the message that we want to get out there. But just putting out these flyers all the time is not reaching everyone. We have an entire population that is just being totally excluded. And we need to start having other alternatives to reach out to them. Now, it can be done also through the NGOs, but it should not be the job of the NGOs alone. The NGOs need to work in collaboration with the Ministry of Education as well as the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services to reach their population. So there needs to be more interaction and more communication within those ministries, with those ministries and the NGOs, and with those ministries and the wider public, taking into consideration those with special needs.
With that said, and I'll start with you and then go to Ms. Ghani before I go to Member Hussein on the voluntary nature of the teacher interaction situation, which from our data that we got last week was very limited. But with that said, we had before us the Director of Student Support Services, Professor Conrad, I do believe his name was, and he said they were overwhelmed before this pandemic, and I could just imagine how much more overwhelmed they are because they've been fielding some 1,200 calls with students with behavioral issues, etc., with limited resources. Has there been any interaction between your NGO, Ms. Ghani's NGO, and to help to use the assets and the expertise of the NGOs in terms of providing that extra layer of support for students and learners with special needs through this situation at all? Have there been any direct contact with the student support services and your organization, Ms. Mahis and Ms. Ghani, Dr. Mahis and Ms. Ghani?
So since prior to this situation, prior to COVID situation, we have been liaising with Dr. Conrad directly on a variety of different things, including teachers' aides. But since the whole situation with the schools, we have not had any contact with the student support services or with Dr. Conrad as yet.
None at all?
None at all.
Ms. Ghani?
Exactly as Dr. Mahis said, we have been, for the last 8 years, since the inception of the network, we have had a very good working relationship with the Ministry of Education and the Student Support Department. Promising discussions. In fact, If you can recall, the inclusive school system was supposed to be launched this year with a pilot project. We have had absolutely no. We had one meeting prior to COVID in March with Dr. Conrad, where we were told it would happen in April. It was supposed to happen in January. Of course, COVID came, and since then we have had absolutely no conversation or communication with Dr. Conrad. We have actually sent him some of these international best practices that we have been researching and sharing with our members for them to look at and consider. WHO also has guidelines, hoping that, maybe in the implementation going forward, they would use some of these instead of trying to recreate, the wheel, use some of these documents as guidelines to come up with our opening protocols. But unfortunately, we have not heard anything from them.
I guess it's just one of those exigent circumstances. I hope that changes. Member Hussein, and the next topic would be, of course, one you wanted to raise earlier, and we go to Member Antoine after, in terms of the challenges being faced by other stakeholders before us today with the voluntary nature of the teacher interaction.
Absolutely, but before I go there, Chair, if you'll permit me, just to ask, what is the number of Form 5 and Form 6 students who are yet to submit SBAs within the network of schools? And also, there was a statement made by the Permanent Secretary Acton that the assessment for students seeking enrollment at the UE will be based on the students' CAPE Unit 1 marks in lower 6 rather than their CAPE Unit 2 results for 2020. And I was wondering if the group that is before us believe that this method of assessment is in fact fair to the children, and especially when you're dealing with the children who have special needs. I mean, how are they impacted by such a decision? And of course, and then I'll go to my substantive question, which is the submission that came from the boards. They indicated that the tutor was advised that teachers would be conducting the online teaching on a voluntary basis. As such, given that distance learning may become a more significant approach to teaching in the future, would you support a renegotiation of the terms and conditions of teachers to establish distance learning as one of the standard methods of teaching?
So I guess we can go to the public secondary schools and the Presbyterian and the other board schools in terms of the assessment protocol that's been suggested for matriculation to university by using, is it lower 6 Unit 1 SBAs as part of the assessment protocol? Is that it, Member Hussein?
Yes.
Yes. So we can go to, I guess, Ms. Carrington James, Mrs. Carrington James first of the principals of public secondary schools, and then we can go to the other secondary school representatives.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Utilization of the lower 6th grade as a basis for matriculation into tertiary level does not immediately to us pose a challenge. The modules, the initial intent of CAPE was that they were individual modules that could stand alone. By the time a child has done Unit 1, he or she is already on a trajectory that will pretty much predict their success at tertiary level. The students who then proceed to 6th form anyway are those who are focused, directed, and we do not see an immediate challenge with that in a nutshell. What we do know is the ability for us locally to do the other thing that nobody speaks about, the award of scholarships and so on, we feel drives that. But we feel there is a balance there because those children this year in 2020 who will speak to scholarships would have already have a full paper in their lower 6. So for us, matriculation to tertiary and the balance of award locally for us, you have that controlling performance in the lower 6 for the current upper 6, and this modified exam in their upper 6. And matriculation to university is not a problem because we feel that you can indeed project on a curve the trajectory of those students.
And I think Professor Copeland of UE, the principal of UE, also said there's collaboration between UE and the 3 campuses in the Caribbean and the secondary schools on that new matriculation matrix that must be enacted because of the COVID pandemic. Mr. Basnat, as the representative of the secondary Astra, Presbyterian schools, what is your perspective on this?
Yes, we support the idea. However, some of the problems we encounter is that some of the students develop later on, maybe in the upper sixth, and they tend to repeat all of their units or one or two of their units to assure greater academic achievement. Whether that would be considered for university requirement may pose a concern, especially if they didn't do well at the lower level. However, I guess bearing all in mind, it should still work out good for the student, and hopefully these things are some of the things they should take into consideration.
Thank you. And from the Astra Board of Education, what's your perspective on this?
People who say here, Mr. Chair, before we go into that aspect, let me, you initially started with the question of the online voluntary teaching by...
No, we're going to that right after, so...
Okay, well then I will pass for the time being. Thank you.
Okay, so Member Hussein, it's yours in terms of the online volunteer teaching and the impact that's having moving forward. The information we had presented to us by the Education Ministry is that, I think, and I hope I'm not misquoting or not recollecting properly, there was 9 or 10% in March and up to 32% participation by teachers in April, if I'm not mistaken. There had not been figures given for May. So, Member Hussein, the floor is yours.
So I was asking, whether the tutor has advised teachers to conduct online teaching on a voluntary basis. And given that distance learning may become a more significant approach to teaching in the future, would you support a renegotiation of the terms and conditions of teachers to establish distance learning as one of the standard methods of teaching? And of course, would also bring into play accountability. How do you establish accountability practices?
Who wants to go first?
Permit me, sir?
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Rahim Hussein once again. The distance learning, while we embrace the technology today, we see it that there's nothing that could physically replace the teacher in the classroom. Nothing up to this point in time, even with the COVID. While we have challenges with the online learning right now, I think permit me to comment, the principal of the head of the Principals Association indicated to reach the masses of students in our population, we utilize the TV and the channel, whatever channel it may be. I would like to humbly suggest that given a scenario where all the teachers, they have the laptops, they're well equipped to do the online teaching, all the students, they have the devices, I want to suggest that we can probably start that right away, almost immediately. Right now, we don't have to wait until September. Right now, we have our schools are vacant. There are no students attending the school. To overcome the problem of the voluntary teaching in the absence of any negotiation with the Ministry of Education and tutor, why is it we, after sanitizing all of our schools, primary and secondary, we ask the teachers to report for duty at the school and they conduct their online teaching from the school? That would alleviate the need for a teacher using his or her resources, providing the internet, the data and whatnot. The teacher would use the school's data.
Well, Mr. Hussein, it may be a very noble suggestion, but it also depends on the assessment by the public health officials, the CMO, in terms of the safety requirements. As the government has indicated, they are phased, 6 phases for reopening and people going back out in different circumstances. So that has to be done, certainly in consultation with the public health officials, because even teachers going back in to a particular location has to be under the guidance of public health officials and the data that they present in terms of maintaining the safety for those teachers.
That's correct. But I prefaced by saying that once the school is sanitized, remember in most of our schools, in our primary schools, in the secondary schools, we have at least 50 members per staff. In the secondary school, in our Astra schools, we have no more than about 25 per school. And we have a huge building in some instances, in most of the cases, where the teachers could be well socially distant and conduct their online teaching. And in this way, each teacher would reach his or her students in his or her particular class. Rather than if we use the committee to counter comment, it's not a case of one shoe fits all.
Absolutely, but as many have said before, it has to be a hybrid approach moving forward. And I think there also needs to be consideration given the World Health Organization and other global public health officials stating that the pandemic situation will become more normal than we prefer. So the education system, to me, given what we've gone through this time around, as an emergency response, must consider a faster response and a more holistic response and a more easily applicable hybrid response moving forward, so that we respond should this happen again in the future in a more effective manner. Anyone else wants to chime in on that? And just in terms of information, the Education Ministry provided approximately 4,000 teachers are providing online services via the ministry's learning management systems, LMS. But they could not verify the number of teachers that are utilizing alternative means and online platforms, including WhatsApp, Zoom, Google Meets, etc. So in terms of the suggestions moving forward, we can go across the floor where that is concerned, and then we can go to Member Antoine, who I know had a question on this topic, standing by.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, concerning the question that Ms. Hussain asked about the policy and what we will do going forward. Now, the voluntary policy is enshrined in what Tutor put out as a home-to-home policy. As we go forward, the Ministry of Education has to come up very clearly with their policy for online learning teaching. In the written submission that we were asked to submit, it was stated that the Ministry of Education indicated there was a policy for online learning teaching. But you would see from the Presbyterian board response, we are not aware of such policy. We were not involved in any such discussion. Online teaching learning will mean having to renegotiate terms and conditions of service between the recognized union and the chief personnel officer. Because working from home will have a number of different issues to look at. The home environment, in terms of the structure, in terms of the persons who are present in the home. So if we have to go forward with online learning teaching as a part of our education system, there will have to be negotiations between tutor, the recognized union, the various stakeholders as to what are the clear-cut policies, what will be the legal obligations, and what will be the legal implications of such a policy.
Thank you. Would the Catholic Board like to chime in on that from your perspective?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a loaded issue. Online, I'm hearing people using online learning and teaching as synonymous with distance education. Distance education embodies far more than that. And in fact, the Ministry of Education had at one time a national open school. There's a national open school of Trinidad and Tobago. There were 32 open schools, actually. The teaching by distance does not necessarily mean teaching from home, and it does not necessarily mean using the computer. There are other forms, other means of teaching. In fact, many of our teachers have already been engaged in such forms of education before the COVID situation. There were many teachers that I know of who engaged students who were not in the classroom for one reason or another. They were ill. We've had students on maternity leave at home. We've had students who had to leave the country with their parents for one reason or another. And teachers have found ways to engage them. The issue here is with schools physically closed, what are teachers required to do? And I think this takes a lot of discussion. And again, I would recommend that all the stakeholders be involved. Teaching from home is part of the issue, but it's only one small part of the issue. The location is, I mean, even if we look at bringing teachers in school and everybody has to be using the internet at the same time, you know, there are other issues, there are physical issues, and there are things. It's something we need to explore, not only because of COVID. As we move forward in September, we've been told schools will open, but in no jurisdiction that I know of has school opened with all the students and all the teachers in the school. They open at one level at the same time.
Remember, Antoine.
One level.
Good day. Going forward, there's a cost to COVID. Okay, we speak about funding for the supply and the sanitization of the schools, the use of thermal units in testing the students as they come into the school. Would we be totally dependent on government to provide this funding, or does the various boards and the various schools providing part of the funding to deal with the issue of how we approach COVID-19 when schools reopen, in particular for the students who have to sit SEA and K?
I think that's a great question, and let's not leave out the private sector in that. I think we can start with the principals, public secondary schools and that. What are your perspectives? And then move to the primary school situation, and we move to the other boards and that.
As you know, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. President. Well, let me start, and you would.
Because remember, Antoine is absolutely right. I mean, the burden, the financial burden of COVID-19 in any jurisdiction, unless you're a very wealthy jurisdiction, it conceivably has to be borne across the board by the state primarily, I'm sure, but certainly by other aspects of the society dimensions to provide the kind of interventions in these emergency circumstances and moving forward. Ms. James, go ahead, please.
All right, I will start. I think our ministry firmly recognizes that. And I would start in the general terms because we feel as an organization, as an association, that our representation to the Ministry of Education was warmly received in the context, particularly of a conference that we have in 2021 that seeks to talk transformation and innovation in education. Trinidad and Tobago would host the Caribbean Regional Conference come 2021, and our ministry recognizes that they can't do it alone. The theme of that conference is innovation in education. So COVID permitted, that's the direction, and we have the full support of the current ministry office.
Is that going to be a virtual conference?
COVID permitted, sir, Mr. Chairman, we will have a historic regional conference. For us, innovation is a mindset. We have to begin to move in that direction that recognizes this is intersectorial. It cannot be the government alone. No state can do it all alone. Hence, we are here. Mr. Mutu, I'll hand Mr. Chairman.
Let me go to Ms. Kalkman first because she's been there for a while and hasn't contributed, and then Ms. Nero on that, please.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the NASPA has some concerns moving forward, the reopening of schools and funding to ensure that our schools are in a place of readiness to receive our students. And one of the concerns we have is that funding has not been received by government schools. And the boards receive some part funding in February, so that we are looking at social distancing and physical distancing in our schools. And NASPA has multiple concerns and challenges looking at that. We are asking, is social distancing and physical distancing really a reality that can take place in the primary school system? Because funding will be needed to supply sanitation, materials, to maintain an environment that is required by the Ministry of Health on a continuous basis. Where does this fund come from? And I heard someone raise earlier that are we going to rely on the government solely? But that is why we need to have consultation, and I agree with Ms. Mongrou the Ministry of Education needs to have all stakeholders in a consultative meeting where we can raise issues and see if we can come up with solutions going forward. Because we, as the Principals Association, particularly we are focusing on the primary schools, we have to look at not just social and physical distancing in the school itself, but the children on the way to school. Transportation to school, most of our students walk to school and take public transport. But there's a new norm that is happening in primary school where we have children being picked up by a driver. And these drivers drive from home to home and pick up children stuffed in a car like sardines in a tin. So there is no social nor physical distancing. So whatever they pick up, they bring it to the school. So that we need to have discussions as to the way forward. Again, sometime in the past, the Principals Association would have raised drop-off and pick-up time. That the Ministry of Education will have to make some pronouncements on, because the majority of students would arrive during a certain time frame. But there are students whose parents drop them off as early as 6 a.m. in the morning. Who is going to provide that supervision? And then there are the parents who believe that the school is the daycare center and they do their grocery shopping and mall shopping, and then they come 6 o'clock, sometimes 6:30, 7 to pick up children. Who will be responsible for these children during that time? So there are a number of factors that we are looking at. And if we are saying we are going to use these thermal testing units to monitor temperatures and so on, there's a cost attached to it, yes. But who actually is going to implement the usage of these thermal units? Is it going to be the security guard? Is it going to be the teacher, the principal? Remember, teachers already have a job spec that is full, and we will be monitoring children. So that these are things we need to look at. Washroom, break time, any break that the children goes on.
And you're dealing with children who are not always going to be totally cognizant or compliant. All right, let me go to Ms. Nero as the operations manager at Catholic Board in terms of the funding issue and the operationalization. And then we're going to go round robin to each person's final comments, because we're in a broadcast clock here and we'd like to end as far as the text tell us to end. So Ms. Nero, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it is absolutely necessary that we consider all the stakeholders in any decision that has to come forward with regard to schools. We must recognize that, yes, teachers have been indeed working on a voluntary basis, and teachers have been going way beyond the call. They've been tapping into all of their resources in order to provide as much as they can for students across the board. We have been speaking about distance learning and so on, but we have not been able to satisfactorily reach all of our students because of connectivity issues and so on. And we must bear in mind that before we consider a physical opening of schools, a solid plan must be provided by our Ministry of Education, engaging the opinions of all the stakeholders before we consider all of those things. So thank you.
All right, so what I'm going to do is go around the room to the heads of the various organizations to deliver your final comments. We thank you and we apologize for the constraints within which we're operating here, but you would understand we try to get as many stakeholders together as possible in the two interventions or interfaces that we've had, because we think it's an important issue to display the issues. And obviously, from what I'm hearing from many of you, you're asking for more consultation and a chance for you to come together and distill these issues and provide recommendations for the benefit of particularly the greatest stakeholders of all, who are the students. So I'll start with Mr. Motley and then go to Mr. Mutu.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. Let me say that consultation, urgent consultation is needed at this time. If we are to go with the calendar that was articulated by the Prime Minister and seems to be supported by the Ministry of Education, that schools will most likely reopen in September. That's not too far away. That's not too far away. So we need to talk, we need to have urgent consultation with all parties involved, just as what we're having today, to discuss the unique context of each situation and to hear about recommendations and solutions going forward. You would have heard my first VP outline some concerns. Those are very real and major concerns, and we are fearful. We don't know what's going to happen come September if these things are not addressed. And the issue of funding, you've talked about funding. Someone I think it's you. You asked the question whether it's fair enough for the government alone to fund the bill. The truth be told is, many of our primary schools depend solely on our governments. Many, particularly our government primary schools, depend solely on government. And it needs to be said, we have not received any funding at all for the academic year 2019-2020. The denominational boards, however, would have received part funding up to February, I'm told, up to February. But again, government schools, primary schools, did not receive funding from 2019-2020. We're going into a new academic year, so to speak, come September. Well, I mean, kinda. We need to talk about funding. So it's urgent, Mr. Richards, Chairman Richards. We need to have these discussions, and we need to have them urgently.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mutu.
Mr. Chairman, members of this JSC, let me, on behalf of the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools of Trinidad and Tobago, take this opportunity to thank this JSC for recognizing the voice of the principals in such an important issue in education and indeed in the history of our country. APS wishes to express our honor to be invited to make an input in shaping how education in 21st century would evolve post-COVID-19. Of course, the call for meaningful, and I stress meaningful, consultation continues to reverberate. And I thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Kalapnath Maharaj.
Chairman, I do also want to say thanks for inviting the Presbyterian Board to participate here today. What has come forward as very clear is that urgent consultation is needed. We have many commonalities, as all our representatives here today and members who were here did say there are many commonalities came forward, and that what happened, that the consultation will also lead to handling those things that are facing us head on and those things that are looming, those issues that are looming in the background. And that one thing that we know that will come out will probably be standardization of many of the issues and dealing with many of the issues that were raised here today. I would like to ask Mr. Ramlal if there's anything that he would like to add on behalf of the Presbyterian Board.
Mr. Ramlal.
Mr. Chairman, I want to join in thanking you as chairman and members of the Joint Select Committee for inviting us. I simply want to say that as we move towards reopening school, there was one suggestion the Presbyterian Board had made concerning the CSEC and CAPE students, and even when we come to SCA, that prior to the students coming out to write the exams, that there should be some sort of psychological counseling for these students, that they should not come out just on the day of the exam to write the exam. The provisions could be made for them to come out a week before or 2 weeks before, where they could be spoken to by professionals to deal with some of the issues of anxiety and stress that they have. We will be appreciative of that. We think it would be something that would be the benefit of our students. I know we did not get the opportunity to discuss SCA, so I would invite the committee to look at the submission that the Presbyterian Board made, of a written submission on SCA. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I think your suggestion about a psychological assessment of our students, particularly going into these important examinations, is extremely important, so that there's an assessment made of how they have coped and what state they're going into in terms of the impact on their possible performance. And also all members are asked to please, if you have not been able to provide all your ruminations today, please feel free to supply them to the committee in writing. We'll take them into our final consideration. Let's go to Mr. Bajnath, please.
Yes, I would like to say thanks to the organizers of this session today. It was wonderful. And the Presbyterian Secondary School Board would like to thank the government for all that they have done in trying to assist schools and the education of our future during this time, during this pandemic time. We'd like to also express thanks to the teachers, especially in our secondary school, who, without a second thought, came out and did what they had to do to ensure that the children were put at foremost. What we'd also like to see is a standardization of an HSC procedure in how we return back to school, so that we'll have all the schools sharing the same methodological way in which we approach this in an HSC manner. Because if school opens in September and the borders open before that, then when school opens, we may have to be looking at some different procedural ways in which we start back our system. Again, we'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to be part of this discussion, and maybe via email and other means we can communicate with each other and have more information circulated to you all, so we can be better adapted and better grasped to handle this pandemic situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Munro.
As we move forward, there are issues of inclusion and equity that need to be addressed, and they have to be addressed far more than issuing simple statements of intent. I think even before we open in September, there's need for widespread consultation. We need to look at the experiences internationally in other jurisdictions. We've got examples right here on our doorstep in the Caribbean and in Latin America that we could draw from. Our greatest resource is our people. And there are many people, many organizations that are willing to contribute what resources, far more than the fiscal resources, to contribute all of the knowledge and the goodwill that we have. We have our teachers who have really, really shown in this time their commitment to education and their commitment to engaging the children of the nation. And so we look forward to continuing consultation and moving forward in education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So going forward, I would really like to hear more from the Ministry of Education about the implementation of the inclusive education policy. I hope that this policy doesn't disappear within this whole COVID-19 situation. I also hope that there'll be more communication between the Ministry of Education and Support Autism TNT, as well as other NGOs. Many of the NGOs, including us, are working from the ground up. We liaise with parents and caregivers, on a regular basis. We have been collecting data, etc., and we know that we can assist the ministry in terms of reaching out to parents and caregivers, and also in terms of coming up with ideas of how we can reach the kids who most need it. I want to thank you for having Support Autism TNT here, and for considering children with special needs, because after all, every single child, regardless of ability, should really have an equal access to education here in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
It is their right. And finally, Ms. Ghani.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to first thank you for making sure that the disability agenda was placed in this Joint Select Committee, because in many instances, we are left behind or not included.
Not under my watch.
I know. And I am very happy to see us included in this discussion, because I think that, again, to be in this group with so many distinguished colleagues and educators, that it gives us a voice too, to make sure that they are also thinking of including children with disabilities and special needs within their schools. I'd like us to see us moving towards, more towards that universal design for learning, and also, where that includes multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression for our children. So, I look forward to positive things in the future, and collaboration, consultation, which results in action. Thank you.
Thank you all. I would like to thank the representatives of the National Primary Schools Principals Association, the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools, the Presbyterian Primary Schools Board of Education, the Presbyterian Secondary Schools Board of Education, the Astra Board of Education, the Catholic Education Board, Support Autism TNT, and Lisa Ghani from Down Syndrome Family Network. We also invited the Psychologists Association of Trinidad and Tobago and the Senator Dam Mahasaba, but they could not be with us today to have a kind of holistic approach. I will give the assurance that we'll try to have more of these, because obviously it is one of the few forums, if any at all, that people could have come together and discuss ideas in a passionate but objective manner. And it shows the need for more of these types of fora in terms of outlining and distilling many of the issues facing education in Trinidad and Tobago, with a view to providing the kind of education we want and molding the kind of citizen we want in Trinidad and Tobago. I'd also like to thank the other members of the Joint Select Committee of Social Services and Public Admin, Member Nawala Hussein, Member Antoine, the Vice Chair, the Deputy Speaker, Esmond Ford, and Member Amin, who joined us for a short while, and the other members who could not be with us today. And of course, I'd like to thank the Secretariat for doing, as usual, human service in organizing this. As I said before, please feel free to submit anything you may have wanted to contribute but didn't have the time to the Secretariat, that we will consider in our final deliberation, so we can provide a holistic report in the interest of the children and the learners in Trinidad and Tobago. On behalf of the entire team, thank you very much, and please be safe out there. Members of the committee, please stay with us for a short while. Stakeholders, thank you so much again. We appreciate you being here with us, and please continue to do your great works and be safe. We'll be in touch soon enough.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All of them will leave now.